Hi. In a field of scholarship and practice dominated by peace talks, what is peace listening and why is it important in international peace mediation? So in this article, Dr. Catherine Turner from Durham University and myself, Dr. Julia Palmiano Federer from the University of Ottawa, we study the process that led to the Maputo Accord in Mozambique that was signed in 2019 and effectively ended decades of conflict between the Frelimo government and the Renamo Mozambique National Resistance. And based on 27 interviews we conducted over 2 trips to Mozambique, follow-up interviews online with the mediators who were following the process and supporting the process at the time, the Peace Process Secretariat in Maputo, and ambassadors posted in Maputo during the process. We outlined 2 framing elements that we think constitute this idea of peace listening, which is a phrase that one of the ambassadors used to describe what they had observed during the process. And the first element is this idea that peace listening requires centering the needs of the parties. And what does that mean? Really prioritizing human-centered values such as relationship and trust building over externally imposed process design. And so listening to the parties. And the second is this enabling environment for peacemaking. So this idea of challenging the structural and hierarchical nature of peace mediation that has really evolved at the international level. In other words, listening to the context. And so why do these 2 elements matter? So in a context where mediation is in decline, we highlight the potential of relationality as this underpinning theory of successful mediation to address the gap in the literature on mediation and peace processes when it comes to relationship and taking relationships and trust at the interpersonal level seriously. And our approach stands in contrast to much of the mediation literature, which has hitherto focused on mediator strategy and realpolitik at the track 1 level, rather than the experiences of the parties in the process or those being mediated upon. So specifically, we seek theoretically this middle ground to relationality. And this means that while we acknowledge that elite relationships between official actors, governments, and leaders of armed groups that characterize the mediation, these are not just interactions within a realpolitik simulation and should not be theorized as such, but that these relationships are formed by subjective attitudes, experiences of accountability, and rooted in historical experiences of both mediation and conflict. And so in Mozambique, in our article, we illustrate how the centering of these interpersonal relationships between the parties really allowed space for the parties to set their own agenda over a long, extended period of time, and therefore enabling local ownership of the process, and this discrete approach of facilitating rather than directing the talks that underpin this web of relationship that allow the process to succeed over time, despite many setbacks and external shocks and challenges. And so in terms of an enabling environment, we illustrate this concept through elements such as core funding, through a donor basket, which is a very unique setup that really signal trust in the process and the parties, and also highlighting this really singular operational adaptability and flexibility of the Peace Process Secretariat that illustrated what it actually meant empirically to listen to the context. And so we don't make a claim to have discovered a replicable template for mediation, nor do we try to set out objective criterion for success, but to demonstrate through the Maputo process that sometimes listening to the parties and the context is just as important as talking.